In today's episode, I interview Joy Pereira, and I loved our conversation. It was one of the episodes that I feel like was more about just like a coffee chat, even though I wasn't drinking coffee during it. But we just chit chatted, and even though she's one of my youngest guests, she does qualify in the midlife ranks, but she is 16 years younger than me. But we had so much in common. We remembered back into the 80s some stuff that what really was fun. We walked down memory lane with some artists and with some Oprah episodes, although the Oprah episodes I think were more recent because they were towards the end of her show. But it was really funny because she lives in Australia. So you will love her accent. She's delight to listen to. I love Australian accents. But she worked at the Sydney Opera House as she like was the behind the scenes putting all the stuff, the shows together. So I remembered when there was that Oprah episode or that week in Australia, and I don't know if you are a big Oprah fan, but if you like listening to me, you know I'm a big Oprah fan. And so we got to talk about that episode or that period of time when she did those shows. So that was really fun. But it's just like, if you want to eavesdrop on somebody chit-chatting, that's what this episode is really all about. And I love her outlook on life. And we share a lot of that in common. And I never knew what nerding meant. I thought nerds were people like bookworms. That's kind of what we associate the word with in America. But with her, it's got a little bit of it has some association, but it's more about kind of geeking out. It's I guess nerding is kind of like geeking out, and geeking out has this more of like, obsessing about something. And so it was really fun to kind of understand that word, and that word is behind her podcast and what her name of her podcast is. So I am going to let you listen in on our conversation, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed talking to her. Welcome to another episode of Not Your Average Lives. And I have with me today Joy Pereira. And I am excited because she's a Joy. And that, if you don't know, is my official middle name that I was born with. Although I dropped it. I say you're going to laugh at this, Joy. I dropped the Joy when I got married, because that's what you do in America. You drop a lot of people do drop their middle name. So yeah, I dropped the Joy when I got married, but that doesn't mean I'm not joyful still. So, but I'm really excited to have her on here because you will be delighted listening to her because she has an Australian accent. She's from Australia. And we have actually been talking almost an hour before I pressed play, just getting to know each other and catching up. And of course, she's very interested in the election because in Australia, they're just watching. She said they're eating popcorn watching. So, but anyways, I'm really excited to have you here. She has a varied background, mostly in the theater. I'll let her get into more of the detail, but as a producer, producing live events. And I just think it's really interesting. One of my bucket list things is a TED Talk, which you have done some of that, I think, producing. So anyways, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
I will say that, there's a lot of stage management in there. So the producing comes from my own creative works and things, but I've spent many moons on stage dealing and working with the finest, and also, working on those TEDs and things. So yeah, it's been great, a great basis of my works.
Yeah, and you were talking, I think in the thing that you sent me, there's that beautiful, what is it called? I'm drawing a blank now, in Sydney. It's
Oh,
just an image that I always think of when
the Sydney Opera House.
yes,
Yes.
yes. And so you've done performances or managed. I think of when you were talking about what you do, it reminds me of somebody who just like herds cats. Is that a good like?
Sometimes it is like herding cats. And yes, I worked at the Sydney Opera House for 23 years. So it
Wow.
was a beautiful time in my life. I've worked on so much variety of performance, you know, major live artists or your favorite ones, perhaps world orchestras, ideas, talks, festivals, the launches, speaker showcases, musicals, so many different things. And it's been a great privilege and honor to do that, because not only are you producing the very best and making a show happen for the audience, but also for the performer. So yeah, I feel quite blessed to do that. What I was telling Laurie is that, you know, these great artists are just people like us. We really are all the same. We all go through that same human experience and emotion. So never really put your favorite performer on a pedestal, because we are all just the same. They're just privileged and have that sort of gift that they can bring to the world, which we probably have as well, don't you think, Laurie?
Yeah, and I feel sorry for performers sometimes too, because we do put them on a pedestal and they just want to relate to people, like, just treat me normal. Don't treat me like anything special. And sometimes that's hard to do though, when it's just that idolization thing that happens with us.
When you meet like your idol on stage and just pulling it back, like being very professional about it and being very calm and cool. And I think the only person I've really, you know, had a meltdown after meeting was Hugh Jackman, but that's just because
Oh,
it's him.
I love
Um,
him. Yeah.
but yeah, otherwise, you know, there's been countless. I
Did you
think
do the Oprah thing? He got on the tightrope and did the
I was
Sydney.
I
Oh,
was there live, but the beauty of it is actually fulfilled the role of a seat filler, because I just had my firstborn. And so I was lucky to get one of the, you know, so it was working, but it wasn't. It ended up, I didn't have to do anything except sit there. And so, yeah, I do have that. I actually got to have some footage on an old phone of filming that moment when he went from the top sail of the concert hall right down to stage. And they'd
he hurt
rehearsed and
himself.
all.
He cut
He
himself or something.
he really hurt himself, and he just continued on, like the velocity of when he hit that the whole lighting truss, the whole thing moving, and then he had to unclip and he had to use like this little line to get him down from actually the roof area down onto stage after you've had major concussion, and then, you know, to get cleaned up backstage and then come out. That's what we do. The show keeps going, but
Yeah.
really
Well,
he
I
could have
remember
been wheeled
Oprah
into
being
hospital.
very concerned about him, so I knew it was a little bit
Yeah.
more serious than it actually looked, and he was kinda shaking it
Yes.
off like, "No big deal," but then they showed it in slow motion. I was like, "Holy moly." So I don't know if anybody who's listening saw that, but I so remember that now, and that's so crazy that you were there.
Yeah,
So you got to
it
meet
was wonderful.
Oprah. If I met
Yeah.
Oprah, I would, like, faint. That's how much I like Oprah.
I didn't meet Oprah that day, but I did have a lot of colleagues that were in and around working on it. So yes, I was very privileged to get like I didn't get any of the special gifts, so that she gave out many gifts, Australian gifts to the audience as well. But just to actually be there in there, and you know, she spoke to the crowd as well beforehand, which was the extra bonus. And then, you know, the machination of how they put it together and the parts that they recorded and all the incidental bits in between was really fascinating, just to see how Oprah's people did it. So that,
Yeah,
yeah, there was
and,
a
they
cast
did
of
a lot
thousands.
of I think they was she there a whole week? I know she and Gail went up on the bridge.
Yeah, so I think that they had people in different pockets. So dependent, like say if they had maybe four teams of people or four groups of people, and so some got
Mm,
to go to the bridge, some went to like the Great Barrier Reef. I think some people went to Uluru, like the centre of Australia, and so they all had different experiences. But then they'd come together as a collective and be down at the
mhm.
Opera House to have these
Yeah.
performances, and
I
you know they
remember
wheeled out.
yeah, I remember another, and I'm pretty sure it was when she was in Sydney too. They did a guy had cancer. Do you remember this story? And he had
Mm,
done a video for his wife. It was a song, and he had acted it out, "Will You Marry Me?" That song, but even though they were married, but every time I
yeah.
hear that song, I think of him, and I think Oprah paid for the woman to take the next year off of her job.
That's right.
Yeah, do you remember that?
Yep. You've stoked
Yeah,
my memory. Yeah.
yeah,
Pretty special, pretty amazing. So, yeah, I have to say that I've really been able to mix it with some of the best of them, and that. But at the end of the
yeah,
day, as the Dalai Lama says, we're all the same.
yeah, and so and I love you're on because you wanted to pivot, and you're actually one of my younger midlifers, but she's 45, so she constitutes, I think anybody that's 40 and above is probably 35 even. But yeah, and so tell me, Joy, what like was going through your head? You have two younger kids. You said they're 11 and 13.
Mm,
So was it after you had kids, or there, it hasn't been that long, and if they're 11 and 13, they've been it's not
yeah.
like you had them and then you're like, oh, I want to be with them more. So what was it that kind of made you start thinking about
Well, I
changing?
think my story is not unique in that there are so many of us out there that, we are leading successful lives or businesses or careers, and then we have children as well. And so it's not a either or, like we overstack and we do a lot of things like, just the nature of what I did, which could be working at 7 o'clock in the morning till 12 at night, depending if it was a really long production day, is not really a good thing when you've got children, when you've got little ones, when you have to feed them and things. So like many of the ladies out there, I did do that juggle, that you know, finishing and going to bed at 1 o'clock in the morning. And then, as they got older, having to drop them off at daycare or at school, getting the least amount of sleep, and then going back and rinsing and repeating, doing it on the same show or on different shows. So no day was ever the same for me. And I think the pivot or the change of what came was not that I was intuitive to go, you know what, this is kind of not so much working for me, but working to the point where the body starts to go, I'm losing sleep, I'm feeling really tired, exhausted, the hair's starting to fall out, the immune system's going low, I'm getting sick all the time, someone coughs on me, I'm getting it. And
Yeah. And
so it
I
was
guess
kind of
you didn't like have weekends off all the time, because I'm sure some of these shows were on weekends.
That's right. You'd work weekends. So it was so ad hoc. There wasn't a system that we had. Literally there was times where my husband would be working too. So I would meet him with the kids in baby capsules and things at the roundabout. If anyone knows that the Opera House is a fountain roundabout there. And we would do like this baby baton where we'd hand over, he'd finish work, I would get to the Opera House and we'd swap out. Then I'd go to work till like midnight and things, and that was not unusual. Like that was, I mean, I was very blessed that they were very accommodating in how they would roster me to put me on performances so that could happen. But what it meant was that, I wore it as a good badge, like that I could actually manage my time, and I lived in 15-minute increments, 15 minutes to get to work, 15 minutes to do this or that, or, iron the clothes or whatever you need, make the baby formula, whatever it was, express. So
Hmm.
yeah, that I think that was the change, if that's what you're asking for, like what sort of made that pivot is that it wasn't an intuitive thing. It was more like an overstacking of stuff that kind of was like a brick to my head. It
Yeah.
was the health that started to diminish, that made me go, oh, you know what? There's something more. I'm searching for more. I love what I do. I've been so privileged to work with the very best. Like music is absolutely embedded in me, to have like live orchestras rehearsing full scores at 10 o'clock in the morning and stuff was just natural. But then to go, there comes a time where you're a seeker. I think you become a seeker, and you want sort of difference or change. And, that was one of the things that people said to me, like when I said that it was time to leave or that I wanted to go to do other things, is they thought I was so brave, because it was a leaving of something that was so familiar and,
Yeah,
a
leaving your
top
comfort
job.
zone, definitely.
Yeah,
Even though
yeah.
you
So
were not feeling well and your health was suffering, a lot of people just stay there until, their body entirely gives up. So did you just say, I'm done and I'm going to think about what I want to do next? Or did you actually have something in mind when you made that move?
I think, for me, it's always, production is quite technical. So there's always been this technical way of doing things. And so I knew that there was, the opportunities of the internet, the opportunities of new technology, and, podcasting is something that I definitely love. You often would make announcements into microphones, and, I've been around that many speakers that I know what's a good a good conversation. What's a juicy, meaty conversation that the audience can take? And so I just thought this is something where I naturally feel like I'm gravitating to. And I actually, when it wasn't always about health. It was also very much about doing my own creative works,
Mm.
having my voice heard, because I spent a lifetime stuffed into dark corners and being like a little puppet master getting things happening. So it was a big sort of unveiling of releasing my creativity by doing things. So I did blog, and I did a lot of external events outside the Opera House. Just sort of, it was that seeking to do something different. But what it actually was it was stacking on more on my plate, and when you're raising little people as well, that makes it even more hard. But I think we think we're superhuman until we almost break ourselves. And so I can look back, there's smile in my voice now as I talk to you, Laurie,
Mm.
because I know better. But what I don't want is for women to experience that. Like, if you have a true, or even men, if you have a true desire, if you feel like you're a bit flat, or you're done with what you're doing, or maybe you're not feeling, there's something else out there, then there's possibility, and we have the opportunity to explore it.
Mm.
Don't be
Yeah.
boxed in by
Yeah.
what you do. So that's how I've kind of come out the other side of doing that. And it's not that I haven't hung up my blacks. We call them blacks backstage, where you wear black so you're not seen. They're not hung up. I can still do that production work. I can still produce. I'm still open to performance and events and things. But I've just found this different way of really wanting to connect with people and make it more digitized. Like, I'm a student in the sense that I really believe that we can craft and curate our own things. And it's taken me a year of just sort of iterating how I want to drive my works and make it digital, whereas everyone else has just been dumped into it because of the pandemic. Suddenly now everyone knows Zoom. But when I started to do my programs and online works, no one knew what Zoom was. They just thought, what's Joyce doing this weird stuff online? What is that? Now here
Yeah.
we are,
Yeah.
having a
And if only
conversation
I
about
bought some
it.
stock. Now
I
I'm like,
know, right?
dang, that wasn't very bright. Yeah.
So,
So one of the things that you said in your notes that you sent me was, I loved that you said that you spent 23 years making special moments on stage for other people, right? To have them
mhm,
shine. So I love that now you're taking that to your online space, into your podcast, and it's about making these special moments.
mm,
It's because it kind of reminds me of Eckhart Tolle. It's he's the power of now. It's like the moment we're in is the most important, and if you can make those moments the most special, and that's what you do for like that's what you're doing and giving to the world. I think that's an amazing thing to do.
yeah, I love it. Like, it's sort of my swan song, and if anything, it's such a privilege to actually be in pajamas and things and have conversations with people and bring them through. So, I'm not looking to have conversations necessarily with the big names that we've already seen and we know about, and they're everywhere. I like to have conversations with people that have not quite broken yet. Like a band that isn't quite there. They're
Yeah.
cool because you don't quite know them, but they've got something to say. And hopefully, I'm that kind of guest for you, Laurie, where I can share things, and I've got interesting things to say that will enhance to your listeners whatever that they've given this time today to listen to us, and that they know, oh, there's joy in the world, and she's doing something that's kind of unique and different. Like, I think that's the uniqueness and specialness that each of us have to share with the world.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so funny you said something about being in your pajamas, and somebody was telling me the other day, they were feeling like something was wrong because they hadn't gotten out in their pajamas all day, and I'm like, "What's wrong with that? I like wearing my pajamas all." Well, I have like leggings. Those are my pajamas. That's like
Megan.
my house clothes and my pajamas. Yeah. So tell me, so we haven't said yet what your podcast is, but we had this conversation because nerds means something different in Australia than it does in the US. So we should talk about that. But it's Nerds of Joy. And so the Nerds of Joy, a podcast. So I thought, oh, it's about nerds who are joyful, like living their passion or whatever. But I just had this she must be a geek is what I thought. And you don't look anything like a geek. So, but nerds means the best way I could describe the way you were telling me, it was like, it's when you're really obsessed with doing something you love, right?
Yep.
You call it
Basically,
nerding.
do you know, I'm just having a flashback thinking, gosh, when I started that podcast, I really should have thrown it out to the American audience to sort of say, what does this mean to you before I labeled it? But what it means is when we say in Australia that we're nerding, and this is probably unique to me and probably not the whole of Australia, but it's just that sensation of really digging into something that you're interested in. Like I might be nerding about crocheting or nerding about I like bikes or vintage caravans or vintage trailers, as you called it. Um, I nerd about neuroscience. So it's just something that you've got a deep interest in. And
Yeah, and I see
that's
how
that
it
nerdiness.
relates. I see how it relates to nerds because if you're nerding and you're doing that, it's like you're learning it. You know, you're reading about it. So yeah.
Yeah. And
Well,
that
and
second
I guess
title is,
yeah, vintage trailer nerding on that is like you like to do it, not just like you have
yeah.
one. Yeah.
So then you can embody it. The sort of subtitle is The Science of Curious Humans, because it is a science, like how that we approach life and things. We may not know about it. You know, all of this stuff, Laurie, about the head and the mind, but you know, it's just that curiosity. It's and it's what makes us human. So hopefully that explains to the American audience or the audience that doesn't quite know what nerd is. It's just a
I
bit of a
love that.
fun.
To me, curious, that's like one of my top values is to always be curious and to promote curiosity
Mm,
because a curious mind is a desiring mind
yeah, it's a learning mind too, isn't it? And it allows you to be open to possibility.
and it won't ever grow old.
That's right. That's why being not an average grandma is a good thing, isn't it? Because of
Yeah.
your curious mind, it's kept you youthful and yeah,
Yeah, and
there's no
people,
barrier.
I used to always, because people sometimes they feel bad about asking questions. And so if you pose it as instead of like, it's fine to ask questions because, like, first of all, if you have the question, probably other people in the room have the question too. But if you pose it as more of a just, it's really good to be curious because it
Mhm.
means you're going to want a deeper knowledge. You want to go deeper. You want to just expand, like you said, and be open to the possibilities. Yeah. It's like,
Yeah, it's
especially if you like, if you're curious, to me, you're not closed.
that's right. And it's not about being nosy or a busybody or you know, trying to harvest ideas or information from other people for your own gain. Like it's purely just sitting in that joy. Like that's the joy factor of it, in the way that you're living or being or the stuff that lights you up. Like we all need a little bit more of that. And I don't think we all give ourselves enough permission to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're still so young and you sang your swan song. I heard you say that. Like I think of
Oh, did
swan
I?
songs as like 80s, 90s. So what are you most excited about right now?
Oh gosh, I think it's the possibility. Like, I tell the listeners that I, you know, said to Laurie that I'm so used to getting interesting people on my podcast or wanting to hear from them, and that it's really feels quite vulnerable to flip it, and then for Laurie to say, "Hey, Joy, come on this podcast." So I've got to talk about myself, and you know, many like that's what I admire about a lot of Americans. They seem like they have the ability that they can just talk about themselves and what they've done and stuff. But we have this thing called the tall poppy syndrome in Australia where we kind of don't want to talk about that, or if you do, then you're seen as like a bit of a, you know, self promoter and you're chopped down.
Well,
um
if you wear your blacks and you're not
yes,
supposed to be seen, well, there's something to be
that's it.
said that's probably
Yeah,
hard for you because that's the role you play, right?
that's right. Like it's always been promoting and putting other people, showcasing their best works and things. So it's this is a transformation in itself, being able to just step up here and go, hey world, on behalf of Laurie, thank you very much for for listening to what I've got to say. I'm it's a different way. And then it's also testing, like testing myself and pushing those extra boundaries that, you know, am I okay as a podcast guest? You know, I'm used to being the host. So I'll leave that up to you listeners and to Laurie.
Yeah. So what do you like to talk about on your podcast? Is it just anything goes, or are there certain subjects?
Well,
I mean, I know I told you, my most listened to podcasts are the ones on sex. So people like curious minds, yes, curious minds want to know about that. And
we
I've
could
been like
talk.
uncomfortable, those aren't my favorite to interview because I'm like, yeah. So,
Yeah, like I think that that's it. For me, I like to talk about a lot of stuff. So at the very core of it, it's how we as humans do our messy human stuff. So you know,
mm,
if we start at this seed of like this idea of that we're all the same. So it doesn't matter if you're the celebrity or you've got the 6 billion followers or anything like that. But you know, we all go through that human experience. So I guess that what I like to talk about is and when I have the guests is I like to dig in a little bit more just to sort of that it's not exposing them, but it's just that realness of talking about, you know, how you're going or, you know, what's been your experience so that the listener can hear that, okay, this person is the top of their field, but they're still doing the same sort of thing or going through that same human thing. And the guests that I've had, because I love the creativity, I love, you know, that we can put ourselves out there more. Um, you know, I want the people who come on to sort of be inspire in their own ways, not overtly, but just by telling their real story. So you know, I've had, you know, we've had the beautiful mindset kind of coaches, and we've had creative like directors on, and I've had you know, last year when I said I think I want to be an entrepreneur, like I was, you know, what greater platform for me than to get together with the gents from the Zuckerberg Institute. So it's Randy Zuckerberg and two incredible guys that have formed this, and also another gentleman, and being mentored by those, like just seeking out, I guess, what you're looking for in that moment, and then connecting and collaborating with these people. So for me, it's like what I've learnt, I like to share on Nerds of Joy podcast. Just getting back to your question, I like to share, you know, the suffering of like going through, you know, when you're overstacking as a woman or doing 6 million things, and how I got through that process. So I've had an expert on, you know, just like burnout and
mm,
recovery, and you know,
yeah,
she's been fantastic. She was incredible with she was actually trained as a emergency doctor, a medical doctor, and then, you know, all of the things that she's done to holistically go through this whole process of well-being to help women. So moving through, so everyone's kind of having these transitions as well with what they're doing. Yeah, and they're all seekers, they're all people that are gifted in entrepreneurship, or, you know, they're book writers, or they're not afraid to not only put themselves out there, but share their knowledge. And so that's sort of that platform or
yeah,
opportunity that I'm trying to present to people.
yeah. Kind of share what your knowledge so that it can help others that
Mm.
might have similar. So one of the things that strikes me with you is that, and probably it comes from your experience with doing all of the production work that you've done, is that you seem to have never lost your creativity. And I think a lot of women, well, like the old me, because I was in a corporate job and I just kind of was like head down, like busy, 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 busy. And I used to say I was like, didn't have a creative bone in my body. I used to like to say that, like I had no creativity. And of course, what I found through studying the brain is that we are all super creative creatures. Like we were born creative, and life has suppressed our creativity. And so what would you say to people who don't think they're creative and are seeking ways to open up that?
Mm. Thank you for asking that question, because we absolutely all are creative. And yes, 100% we are born with it. So I don't buy into the people that say, you know, I'm corporate and I'm serious and I'm not creative, because we do have it, and it definitely has been beaten out. daydreaming was something that, as a creative kid, I like to do. And it's sort of looked down upon. People think that you're not being efficient, you're not being productive if you don't daydream. But you need to make that space for creative ideas to flow and to come through. And that's what we feel guilty about. I think many women feel guilty about just making that pause or taking that pause. They won't give themselves 3 minutes to have a cup of tea,
Yeah,
to
I just read a
mind
book and it
wander.
said you should be doing that 20 minutes a day.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
I minimized that to say 3 minutes
Yeah.
because I know there might be people that would feel bad if they hear that. But
They can start with
I think
3 minutes, right?
that's
It's like
right, because we've been scrolling for 40 minutes. We've forgotten about that. We've just continued to scroll. So
so
yeah,
true.
it's
Replace
the
your
well-being
scrolling with
practice.
daydreaming. I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. That whole notion of forest bathing, just getting out in nature. And I mean, it's hard to do in these moments, but with COVID and if you're stuck at home, but we can do that in the mind. And I think that's the hard thing. A lot of people, we wear that productivity busy badge where we're sort of so stuck with that emotional feeling of being productive that we don't want to give ourselves that space. And the only way is to travel in the mind quietly or just sit there at peace.
Yeah. Yeah. And when
Yeah.
you open that door to the mind, things open up for you. I've
That-
so true. So true. And what you think is lost time because you're daydreaming is really found time about your direction and where you should
yeah.
go. So puppies help because I got a puppy this year and he goes on a walk and it's great because it gets him tired so he takes a nap.
Yeah.
But I used to like run in my mid 30s. I used to run and I have these great playlists. And granted, some of the songs are a little old, but they're so good. They're such good songs, and I have not listened to my playlist for so long. And this past year, I think going out walking him, and it's like, oh, it's like revisiting like the past with like listening to some of these songs. It's so much
I so
fun.
love that. What's
Yeah,
on your playlist?
Love
I love
Shack.
that.
It's a
Oh,
little love place.
yes,
Those kind of songs.
B-52s. But you know what? That is exactly right. And in fact, I was doing a podcast the other day, and it was just about that. It was that Jamiroquai. Was Jamiroquai big in America? A
Mm,
band? They're a
uh,
British band,
it
sort of
doesn't
like
ring a bell.
jazz funk from the 90s. Anyway, there might be some connoisseurs out there that know Jamiroquai, and they were massive, really huge. And I heard it on the radio as I was dropping the kids at school and came back and fell down a rabbit hole. I actually saw the video clip from the 90s that I'd never seen because we didn't have technology to the degree that we do now. And it was like you said, it was that return of this sensation, this moment. And I thought, wow, they were simpler times, but they weren't really, because when I was listening to that kind of music, you were still stressed out, you were still worried about certain things. And, it's that ability to change and recognize that we fall into these patterns of thinking or ways of being. And that's what brings that creativity. Like that's what can bring that space. So yeah, I think I
Yeah,
love music.
yeah,
I love that you've got a
yeah,
podcast a playlist.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's
So,
good.
as we close, what would you like to leave the listeners with? What message do you have as a podcast host, now podcast guest, the shoes on
Yeah.
the other foot? What do you usually close with on your podcast? Do you have a
Oh,
particular
many
question
things.
you usually ask?
Yeah, I do ask people, if they do have anything to say, but and so it's weird that I now get that opportunity to say that. So thank you. I think it's just, really keep yourself open to possibilities, that we are all creative beings, and you may not think it, but give yourself that space so that you can explore other things, like be curious. And you know we've got to invest in ourselves. I think more now than ever, we really have to make that space so that we can invest in ourselves, to know that, it's not all over determined by your age or that. There's so much more out there. And
Mm,
if you're bursting to do something new, then, that's your instinct. So I think it's go with it. You can research it, you can nerd out about it,
mm.
but there's so much possibility out there. And just, give yourself permission. And if you don't, then get permission from someone else. DM Laurie, get permission from her too.
Yeah, and one thing that we touched on very, very minimally, but I think it's an important point, is that listen to your body, because it sounds like you were really in tune. You said like you got whacked on the side of the head or something to that effect, but it sounds, I've had people on who, I remember, I think it was Lisa Bader. She got so sick, she actually was bedridden for like a year. And so that's like a big old whack on the side of the head. And it sounds like you were really in tune with what was going on with you physically. And so if anybody is feeling kind of like super tired, hair falling out, not getting sleep, and just getting sick all the time, there is something going on that you need to investigate.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think it's that thing of when it's happening to you, and we've all been built to be machines, and we all want to be machines to be the most productive and have success. But it's not success if you don't have your health. Like, it really starts with the basis of health. And no, I wasn't an oracle or anything like that. Like, I needed that brick to the head myself, because you know, I was embedded with themes of the show must go on and stuff, and like production at all costs. But
Yeah, it
you know,
probably went on for a few months, right?
it did.
Before,
It
yeah.
went on for, you know, that's how we lived. That's how we
Yeah.
make performance, perfection, all of that. But it was
Mhm.
really that those cues that finally came in that made me go, we need to change the way that we're doing. I need to actually invest in the rest of my body, because I
Mm.
guess, operated from the neck up, always thinking
Mhm.
and analyzing. Whereas it's, if we can integrate the whole body and understand that, you know, it doesn't, it's all one organism. We need to honor that and work through that. There's definitely ways. So please invest in yourselves. Look into that first. Don't think things are wrong with you necessarily straight away, or because there's solutions out there. And you know, that's where the possibility comes in. And yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity to speak to your
Yeah,
listeners
it was so
and
nice to
happy
have a
connecting.
chat. We've been talking now, I think, gosh, an hour and a half total. Okay, thanks so much, and we'll see you soon. Thank you so much for tuning into the Not Your Average Lives podcast. If you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe on iTunes if you have an Apple device. You can find free resources and learn what else I have going on at the moment that might interest you on my website at notyouraverage.grandma.com. You can also find me on Instagram or Facebook at Not Your Average Grandma. If you liked this episode, it would make my heart so happy if you could leave me a 5-star rating. You can also add a review to let me know what you like about this podcast, which will help spread the word about it to others who need a little midlife inspiration. As always, be you, listen to your inner voice, and focus on reigniting that lost spark so you can start living your own, not your average life.